Three things happened this week, and I want you to understand before I explain any of them. Saudi Arabia went to war. The United States is preparing to strike an underground nuclear facility buried inside a mountain. Iran launched what CENTCOM called an attempted surprise ballistic missile attack on U.S. forces, which was intercepted while simultaneously telling the press it wants diplomacy. It's August 2nd, 5 months and 4 days since this war began. I'm Skelly. Let's go. For 5 months, Saudi Arabia has occupied an uncomfortable position in this war, a country being actively targeted by Iran and its proxies, absorbing missile strikes, losing oil tankers in the Red Sea, and watching its infrastructure get hit, while officially remaining on the sidelines of the fighting. This week, that ended. U.S. Central Command announced that U.S. and Saudi Arabian forces conducted joint strikes against Iran-aligned groups in Iraq, described by CENTCOM as precision strikes on terrorist logistics and weapon sites across eastern Iraq, in response to over 30 IRGC-directed aerial drone attacks in the prior 72 hours. The Saudi Minister of Defense confirmed the strikes, describing them as a right of self-defense. The Popular Mobilization Forces, an Iran-backed Iraqi paramilitary group, said at least 20 of its fighters were eliminated and 32 wounded. Saudi Arabia's involvement is notable. The kingdom has largely resisted being pulled fully into the conflict, but it has recently found itself increasingly targeted by Iranian-backed proxies in Iraq and by the Houthis targeting their vessels in the Red Sea. Let me explain why this matters beyond the immediate military action. Saudi Arabia is not a small country deciding to do something dramatic. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil exporter. It controls a significant portion of the global oil production capacity. When Saudi Arabia becomes a direct military belligerent in the conflict that has already involved the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea, it changes the calculus on every oil market on the planet. The joint strikes come after Saudi Arabia had itself been subject to over 30 IRGC direct drone attacks in 72 hours and found its oil facilities targeted. Here is the straight line from this development to your life in the Ohio Valley. Oil exports through the Strait of Hormuz may not return to levels seen before the war, according to an analysis published this week, regardless of how negotiations proceed, because the infrastructure and the trust required to restore normal operations will take time even after a ceasefire holds. If a ceasefire ever holds. Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure has now been directly targeted by Iran and its proxies multiple times. Saudi Arabia is now actively retaliating. Saudi Arabia's ability to ship oil, already under pressure from Houthis' attacks on tankers, is in a more precarious position today than it was last Sunday. Every one of those factors is a variable that affects global oil supply, and global oil supply is the variable that determines your gas prices, your heating bill, the cost of everything transported by a truck to the store where you buy your groceries. The U.S. military has made preparations to launch strikes targeting Iranian nuclear infrastructure, including Pickaxe Mountain south of Tehran, and those preparations has picked up momentum in recent days, which brings us to story number 2. I want to spend some time on this story because it's the most technically complex development in the entire war, and it's about to become the most consequential. Pickaxe Mountain, located in central Iran, approximately 2 kilometers from the Natanz nuclear facility, one of the sites the U.S. struck in the opening campaign of this war in February. Construction of this site began in 2020 after an explosion damaged the Natanz above-ground advanced centrifuge assembly plant. Iran has maintained that the underground complex was built solely for assembling and manufacturing advanced centrifuges. The underground facility was not attacked during the February 2026 strikes because it was believed to be empty or nearly empty. However, after those opening strikes, Iran began moving centrifuges and other equipment from Natanz, Bordeaux, and Isfahan into Pickaxe Mountain tunnels. Quietly, in the months that followed, attempting to conceal the transfer from satellite surveillance. Israeli intelligence assessed that Iran transferred centrifuges, which could be used to enrich uranium, to Pickaxe Mountain last fall. Iran is believed to possess close to 1,000 pounds of highly enriched uranium, which is near weapons grade. CNN reported that Iran has dramatically escalated efforts to seal off its cache of near weapons grade uranium, deliberately collapsing tunnels and booby-trapping entrances with explosive mines. Trump said this week, and I quote, "We'll be hitting that area very probably pretty soon, and there's not a thing they can do about it." Wait, he actually said very probably pretty soon? Yeah, that's what he said. Good Lord. Iran responded by warning that any attack on its nuclear facilities would be treated as an expansion of the war. Here's what I want you to understand about the potential strike on Pickaxe Mountain and what it does and doesn't mean for you. The facility itself is built into granite, one of the most resistant material to aerial bombardment, and required the U.S. military's GBU-57 heavy bunker buster bombs, of which stockpiles are limited. The U.S. Air Force would need to complete detailed planning and logistic preparations for an operation of this level. The target is an underground nuclear facility, not a surface structure, not a military base. A hardened, granite-embedded, booby-trapped underground complex potentially housing centrifuges capable of enriching uranium to near weapons-grade level. If Tehran succeeds in consolidating enough material, it could possess enough for more than one atomic bomb. Once weapons-grade material is available, the path to assembling a nuclear weapon becomes relatively short. I am not telling you a nuclear weapon is imminent. I'm telling you that the stated objectives of this war, preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, has arrived at its most critical decision point. What does a strike on Pickaxe Mountain mean, practically, for the Ohio Valley prepping community? It means that Iran's response to such a strike will be the largest retaliatory action of the entire war. Iran has said so explicitly. The escalation that followed a strike on a nuclear facility would dwarf anything we've seen in the last 5 months. That means oil market disruptions on a scale beyond what we've already experienced. It means supply chain pressure beyond what we've already documented. It means the window between things are bad and things are significantly worse could be very short. The U.S. military is currently in a 5-day pause in direct strikes on Iran, the longest pause in weeks, while diplomats attempt to restart talks. Iran says it isn't currently seeking direct talks. President Trump told reporters the U.S. and Iran have had very good talks and expressed optimism a deal could be reached. But it warned the U.S. will finish the job if it isn't. Very good talks, while Iran launches ballistic missiles at U.S. forces. We've been here before. Story 3 is a little different this week. We have been covering this war every Sunday since May. I have been tracking it since it began on February 28th, and with Saudi Arabia now a direct belligerent and a potential nuclear facility strike on the horizon, I think it's worth stepping back. Not from the weekly updates, but to give you the full picture of where things actually stand as of today. Not the diplomatic language, not the press releases, the honest accounting. On February 28th, the United States and Israel launched strikes against Iran, aiming to eliminate its nuclear program and induce regime change. Iran's supreme leader was eliminated. Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz and launched retaliatory strikes across the region. A ceasefire was reached in April. It broke. A memorandum of understanding was signed in June. It broke. 13 consecutive nights of U.S. strikes followed. A 5-day pause is now in effect. Iran lost a surprise ballistic missile attack during the pause. Saudi Arabia entered the war, and Pickaxe Mountain is next on the target list. Since June 27th alone, 59 people have been unalived and 666 others injured in Iran. At least 4 U.S. service members have been eliminated in the most recent wave of Iranian strikes. Oil prices have not recovered to pre-war levels and may not, even if a ceasefire is reached, due to the damage of infrastructure and trust. Iran's conditions for ending the conflict include firm guarantees against future aggression, recognition of its legitimate rights, payment of reparations, a new regime governing the Strait of Hormuz, including tolls collected, and a ceasefire in Lebanon. The U.S. has rejected the toll proposal. Iran's ballistic missile program is not on the negotiation table. Those are the positions of both sides. They have not moved significantly in 5 months. Here is a question I want you to sit with today. If someone would have told you on February 27th, the day before the war began, that 5 months later oil would be at $100 a barrel, Saudi Arabia would be conducting joint military strikes with the U.S. in Iraq, the Strait of Hormuz would still be contested, the Red Sea would have a new active front, and the U.S. would be preparing to strike an underground nuclear facility, what will you have done differently to prepare? Because here is what is true and what I want to be direct about. The people who prepared in March, who built their food storage, topped off their fuel tanks, kept cash on hand, reduced their exposure to supply chain stress, did so at $70 a barrel oil, and lower grocery prices, with more runway and less urgency. Every week since then, the situation has given new viewers to this channel a reason to do those same things, and every week, those actions have been slightly more expensive and slightly more urgent than the week before. Today is not the worst day to prepare. It is better than next week may be. Your fuel storage. If you haven't acted on last week's warning before the pump adjusted, gas is now above $4 a gallon in most of the Ohio Valley. The window to beat last week's spike has passed, but the next spike is not yet priced in. Act before it is. Your food storage. September is 5 weeks away. The harvest price spike forecast we've been tracking since June is 5 weeks from landing on grocery store shelves. 5 weeks. Your cash on hand. When a situation involving 6 active military parties, a potential nuclear facility strike, and a Saudi oil infrastructure under attack escalates further, ATM lines form. Keep cash. And your awareness. Keep watching. Keep updating your understanding of where this is going. Because the people who knew and prepared and kept paying attention, they're the ones who are fine when things move fast. And that's the honest accounting. And that's your week. Saudi Arabia has joined the war. The United States military is preparing to strike Pickaxe Mountain. And the negotiation positions of both sides remain fundamentally incompatible. The 5-point action plan from last week stands. It is more urgent this week than it was last week, and it will probably be more urgent next week than it is this week. Stay prepared, Ohio Valley and beyond. I'm Skelly, and we'll see you all next Sunday. Assuming we're all still here.
Hey guys, all of our videos now are sponsored by My Patriot Supply. Emergency food, water filtration, solar generations, and more. Go check them out. Link down in the description. And if you use that link, yeah, we do make a few pennies, but helps us keep doing what we're doing. Thanks a lot, guys. Go check them out.